My parents sold my grandmother's antique Steinway piano behind my back. They took the one heirloom she specifically left to me and used the $150,000 to buy my golden child sister a Mercedes G Wagon. When I told my grandmother the news from her hospice bed, she did not cry. She simply picked up her phone, made one call, and said it is time for them to meet my attorney. Before I tell you how my family lost everything trying to steal my inheritance, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe. If you have ever had to watch a toxic sibling get rewarded for being lazy while you worked for everything you have. My name is Nia, and at 32 years old, I thought I had seen the limits of my parents' favoritism. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home in Chicago. I was just stopping by to pick up some mail before heading to the hospice center to see Nana Rose. That was when I saw it. Parked right in the spot where my father's sedan usually sat was a brand new obsidian black Mercedes G Wagon. The sun reflected off its polished chrome rims blindingly. I squinted at the vanity license plate and felt a wave of nausea roll over me. It read, Toya's Ride. My sister LaToya had been complaining for months about needing a new car because her 3-year-old Honda was apparently embarrassing for a mother of two. But LaToya had not worked a real job in 4 years, and her husband Brad was a struggling day trader who lost money faster than he made it. There was no way they could afford a 6-figure luxury SUV. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I grabbed my purse and marched to the front door. The house was strangely quiet. Usually the TV would be blaring cartoons for my nephews, but today there was only silence. I pushed the door open and stepped into the foyer. The air smelled of cleaning polish and something else. Guilt. I walked into the formal living room and stopped dead in my tracks. My breath hitched in my throat. The far corner of the room by the bay window was empty. For 30 years, that corner had been occupied by Nana Rose's 1920 Steinway Model B grand piano. It was the heart of this house. It was where Nana taught me to play scales when my parents were too busy fawning over LaToya. It was the only thing Nana had explicitly promised to me in her living trust. Now all that remained were 3 deep indentations in the plush beige carpet and a rectangle of dust where the sunlight had not touched for decades. I walked over to the empty space, my hands trembling. I knelt down and touched the matted carpet fibers. They were still compressed from the weight of the instrument. It had not just been moved to another room. It was gone. The silence in the room screamed at me. They did not just sell a piece of furniture. They sold my memories. They sold the only part of this family that made me feel loved. I stood up, my vision blurring not with tears, but with a rage so hot it felt like it would burn the house down. I heard footsteps on the stairs behind me. It was my mother, Viola. She descended the staircase wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than my first car. Her face remained impassive as she looked from me to the empty corner. "Stop being dramatic, Nia," she said, her voice smooth and cold. "It was just an old piece of furniture taking up space." My father Desmond emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. He nodded at me, not as a greeting, but as an acknowledgement of my presence. "We finally got rid of that dust trap," he announced proudly. I felt my knees lock to keep from collapsing. "You sold it," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "That piano has been in this family for 4 generations. Nana promised it to me." My mother laughed, a harsh sound that grated against my nerves. "Promises do not pay for safety, Nia. Promises do not drive your nephews to school in a blizzard. We did what had to be done. A man named Marcus came by this morning. He paid cash, $150,000. My father pulled a thick envelope from his pocket and waved it in the air like a trophy. "Do you know how hard it is to get that kind of liquidity these days? We made a killing on that old firewood." My head spun. $150,000. They had sold a restored 1920 Steinway Model B, an instrument worth nearly double that amount, for quick cash, just to satisfy my sister's vanity. "That was not yours to sell." I stepped forward, my hands clenched into fists. Nana is still alive. That belongs to her trust. My mother stepped off the last stair and walked right up to me, invading my personal space. She poked a manicured finger into my chest. Nana is in hospice, Nia. She does not know what day it is, let alone what furniture is in this house. As her power of attorney, your father and I made an executive decision. We reallocated assets. I looked at the driveway where the G Wagon sat. You mean you liquidated a family heirloom to buy a toy for Latoya? My father scowled. Watch your tone, girl. That car is not a toy. It is a symbol. Your sister is trying to build a personal brand. She cannot show up to networking events in a beat-up Honda. She needs to project success to attract success. The G Wagon is an investment in her future. I stared at them in disbelief. They truly believed their own lies. They saw a depreciating asset as an investment and a priceless piece of history as junk. You traded a legacy for a status symbol, I said, my voice shaking with fury. And you did it while Nana is dying. My mother shrugged, turning toward the kitchen. We did it for the family, Nia. Something you would understand if you were not so obsessed with hoarding old things. Now move out of the way. Brad is mixing drinks to celebrate. Brad emerged from the kitchen, holding 2 crystal tumblers of amber liquid, the ice clinking softly against the glass. He wore a crisp white polo shirt that was tucked too tightly into his beige chinos, an outfit that screamed country club aspirant. He didn't offer me a drink. Instead, he handed one to my father and took a long, satisfied sip from his own, letting the silence stretch out just to show he was in control. You need to relax, Nia, he said, his voice dripping with that condescending calmness that always made my skin crawl. You are looking at this all wrong. You are seeing a dusty old instrument. I see asset reallocation. He swirled his drink, gesturing around the room with his free hand as if he owned the place. Look, I get it. You are single. You live alone in that downtown apartment with no one to worry about but yourself. You do not understand the pressure of providing for a real family. He emphasized the word real, as if my life was merely a dress rehearsal. When you have children, priorities shift. Safety becomes paramount. That G-Wagon is not just a car, it is a tank. It is peace of mind for your sister and my children. I felt the blood pounding in my ears. You are lecturing me about finance, Brad? I asked, my voice deadly quiet. You who asked to borrow $5,000 last Thanksgiving because you leveraged yourself too high on crypto. Brad's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he recovered quickly, stepping closer to me. That is exactly why I stepped in here, he said, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, as if doing me a favor. Desmond and Viola were sitting on a dead asset. That piano was doing nothing but gathering dust and taking up square footage. I simply showed them how to unlock its liquidity. Honestly, you should be thanking me. I saved them from having to ask you for help again. He took another sip, looking at me over the rim of his glass with pity. See, that is the difference between us, Nia. You hold on to things for sentimental reasons. I make moves. I make things happen. I turned that wood and wire into a status symbol that will open doors for Latoya. In this world, perception is reality. And frankly, nobody respects a family that keeps a fortune rotting in the corner of their living room while driving a Honda. He chuckled, shaking his head. You are a forensic accountant, right? You should appreciate the numbers. We turned zero yield into immediate utility. It is basic economics, sweetheart. My father nodded in agreement, looking at Brad with the admiration he had never shown me, despite the fact that I had paid off their mortgage 2 years ago. Brad is right, Nia, my father said. He has a vision for this family. He is thinking about the legacy we leave behind. The irony was so thick I could taste it. They were talking about legacy while celebrating the sale of the only true heirloom we possessed. Brad placed a hand on my father's shoulder, a gesture of ownership. We are just doing what is best for everyone, Naya. Maybe one day when you find someone and settle down, you will understand the sacrifices parents have to make. Until then, try not to ruin your sister's moment with your bitterness. It is not a good look on you. I did not even look at Brad. His words were just noise, the buzzing of a fly that thinks it is an eagle. I pulled my phone from my purse, my fingers trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of pure outrage. "There is one person who can clear this up," I said, unlocking my screen. "I am calling Nana right now. If she truly authorized this sale, if she really decided that Latoya's image was more important than our heritage, I want to hear it from her lips." My mother moved faster than I had seen her move in years. She crossed the distance between us and slapped her hand over my phone screen, her nails digging into my wrist. "Do not you dare!" She hissed, her mask of cool matriarch slipping to reveal the desperate woman beneath. "You will not disturb her." I tried to pull my hand back, but her grip was iron. "Why, Mom?" I asked, staring her down. "Are you afraid of what she will say? Or are you afraid she does not know what you have done?" Viola's eyes narrowed into slits. "She is sedated, Nia. The doctors put her under heavy medication this morning. Her heart is failing. Any stress, any shock could be fatal." "Do you want that on your conscience? Do you want to be the reason your grandmother dies today, just because you are throwing a tantrum over a used piano?" The accusation hit me like a physical blow. It was their favorite weapon. Weaponized guilt. They knew I loved Nana more than anyone. They knew I was the one who sat by her bedside for hours reading to her while Latoya was out shopping. "She was fine 2 days ago," I said, my voice wavering slightly. "I spoke to her nurse. She was lucid. She was asking for her reading glasses." Things change fast. At 85, my father chimed in, stepping up beside my mother to form a united wall of deceit. "She took a turn for the worse last night. She is practically comatose. We are trying to protect her dignity. We are trying to let her go in peace without you dragging your petty jealousy into her hospital room." I looked from my mother to my father. Their faces were hard, unyielding. But there was something else there too. A flicker of anxiety in my father's eyes. A bead of sweat on my mother's upper lip. The timing was too perfect. Nana conveniently falls into a coma on the exact day they finalize a cash sale of her most prized possession. My forensic accountant brain was screaming that the numbers did not add up. This was not a medical emergency. This was a cover-up, but I had no proof. And if there was even a 1% chance they were telling the truth, I could not risk hurting Nana. I lowered my phone. My mother exhaled a breath she had been holding and released my wrist. Her smugness returned instantly. "Good," she said, smoothing her silk robe. "At least you have a shred of decency left. Now, since you clearly cannot be happy for your sister, perhaps it is best if you leave. We have a celebration to continue, and your negative energy is ruining the vibe." I looked around the room, the empty corner, the whiskey in my father's hand, the smirk on Brad's face. They thought they had won. They thought they had silenced me with their lies. I slipped my phone back into my bag. "I will go," I said quietly, "but do not think this is over." As I turned to the door, I heard Latoya giggle behind me. "Bye, Nia. Do not let the door hit you on the way out. Drive safe in your little sedan." I walked out into the cold Chicago air, my heart pounding a rhythm of war. They had taken my piano. They had taken my place in the family. But they had made one fatal mistake. They underestimated how much Nana Rose loved me. And they underestimated what I was willing to do to find the truth. Just as I reached for the doorknob, Latoya skipped into the hallway. She was beaming, twirling a set of heavy electronic keys around her finger. The Mercedes-Benz logo flashed silver under the chandelier light. She stopped when she saw me, her smile twisting into something resembling pity, but feeling more like triumph. Leaving so soon, she asked, her voice high and feigned innocent. "You did not even come outside to see the interior. It has heated massage seats, Nia. The boys are going to love it." I looked at the keys spinning in her hand. I did not see a car. I saw my grandmother's legacy melted down and reshaped into a symbol of my sister's vanity. "That is not a car, Latoya," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "That is Nana's Steinway. You are driving her memories." Latoya sighed loudly, rolling her eyes toward our parents for support. Oh my God, is she still talking about that old thing? Mom, tell her to stop being so morbid. It is ruining my mood. My mother stepped forward, placing a protective hand on Latoya's shoulder, physically shielding the golden child from my words. We asked you to leave, Nia, my mother said, her tone sharp and final. This is a happy occasion. We are celebrating your sister's success and the safety of your nephews. If you cannot be supportive, if you are going to stand there and project your toxic negativity onto this family, then you are not welcome here today. My father nodded from the living room, taking another sip of his whiskey. Go home to your empty apartment, Nia. Cool off. Come back when you are ready to apologize to your sister and Brad for making a scene. Apologize. The word hung in the air like a bad joke. They wanted me to apologize for being upset that they had committed grand larceny against a dying woman. I looked at the three of them. My mother, the enabler. My father, the weak accomplice. And Latoya, the parasite who believed she was a princess. They stood together, a united front of delusion and greed. They looked at me as if I were the villain, the bitter spinster sister who could not stand to see them shine. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply adjusted my purse on my shoulder and straightened my spine. I realized then that arguing with them was useless. You cannot explain morality to people who have sold their conscience. Fine, I said. Enjoy the car, Latoya. Drive it in good health. I opened the heavy oak front door. The cold wind hit my face, shocking my system back to reality. I stepped out onto the porch, but before I closed the door, I turned back one last time. Just remember, I said, looking directly at my mother. Nana always said the truth has a way of coming out, even from the grave. I shut the door before they could respond. As I walked to my sensible sedan parked in the shadow of the massive black G Wagon, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. They thought they had won because I walked away. They thought they had silenced me. But as I sat in my driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel, I did not feel defeated. I felt focused. They forgot who I was. They forgot that I spent my days tracking hidden assets and exposing financial fraud for a living. They forgot that I knew how to follow a paper trail better than anyone in the state of Illinois. I looked at the house one last time, the warm light spilling from the windows where they were toasting to their theft. They have no idea, I whispered to the empty car. I started the engine. I was not going home to cry. I was going to my office. The celebration was over. The investigation was just beginning. This was not a family dispute anymore. This was war. And unlike them, I had the receipts. My apartment was silent, a stark contrast to the noise and toxicity I had just left. I tossed my keys on the granite island and did not even bother taking off my coat before I sat down at my workstation. 3 monitors hummed to life, casting a cool blue glow over my living room. This was my domain. In this chair, I was not the scapegoat daughter or the jealous sister. I was Nia, the forensic accountant, a woman who could find a single missing dollar in a Fortune 500 company's ledger. If my parents thought they could hide the details of their crime from me, they were even more delusional than I thought. I cracked my knuckles and began typing. I had access to their main checking account because I had been the one bailing them out of overdraft fees for the past 5 years. I logged in, bypassing the 2-factor authentication that pinged to my phone, not theirs. There it was. A pending deposit dated today, $150,000. The sender was listed as Marcus Thorne Antiquities, LLC. I opened a new tab and ran a background check on Marcus Thorne. He was not a collector. He was a liquidator, a shark who swam in the waters of estate sales in desperate airs, offering quick cash for items he knew he could flip for double the price. My stomach churned as I pulled up the auction records for 1920 Steinway Model B pianos. I filtered by condition, restoration history, and provenance. Nana's piano had been fully restored 10 years ago. I had paid for it myself as a birthday gift to her. It was not just furniture, it was a masterpiece. The search results loaded, and I felt the bile rise in my throat. Similar models were selling for $250,000. Some even reached $300,000 if the soundboard was original, which Nana's was. I sat back in my chair staring at the numbers. They had not just stolen from me. They had not just betrayed Nana. They had practically given the piano away. They were so desperate to get that Mercedes in the driveway today, so eager to flash a symbol of wealth to the neighbors, that they had lost $100,000 in equity. It was the stupid tax, the price of financial illiteracy and impatience. Brad, the self-proclaimed investment genius, had negotiated a deal that robbed the family blind. I looked at the transaction again. $150,000. It was a lot of money to them, enough to buy a luxury SUV and feel rich for a few months. But in the world of high-end assets, they had been fleeced. The pain that washed over me was not just about the loss of the object, it was the sheer stupidity of it. They destroyed a legacy for pennies on the dollar. I printed the transaction receipt and the valuation report. The printer whirred, spitting out the first pages of my evidence file. I was not just going to get the piano back. I was going to show them exactly how much their greed had cost them. But first, I needed to see just how deep this financial rot went. I opened the tab for the sub-credit card account I managed for their medical expenses. If they were reckless enough to sell a Steinway to a shark, I dreaded what else I would find. I clicked on the tab for the secondary Visa card I had issued to my father 3 years ago. It was a decision born out of guilt and necessity. He had complained about the rising cost of his insulin and my mother's blood pressure medication. I wanted to be a good daughter, so I gave them this card with strict instructions, pharmacy copays, and emergency medical expenses only. I even set a generous limit of $2,000 a month, thinking it would cover everything with a safety buffer. I watched the loading icons spin, my breath shallow in my chest. When the statement appeared, the numbers blurred for a second before snapping into terrifying focus. The current balance was not $200. It was $6,840. They were over the limit. I scrolled down to the transaction history, my forensic eye scanning for the pharmacy codes I expected to see. They were not there. Instead, I saw a catalog of indulgence that made my stomach turn. January 12th. Serenity Day. Spa. $450. January 14th. Nordstrom. $1,200. January 15th. The Prime Steakhouse. $380. They were living a life of luxury on my dime while I worked 60-hour weeks. But then my eyes landed on a transaction processed just 2 hours ago. It was the final nail in the coffin of our relationship. Allstate Insurance, $5,022. I clicked on the transaction details. The policy number was listed along with the vehicle description, 2024 Mercedes-Benz G-Class. My blood ran cold. They had not only sold my inheritance to buy the car, but they had also used my own money to insure it. They had maxed out the emergency medical card to pay the premium on LaToya's vanity project. I sat back, the glow of the monitor illuminating the tears of rage pricking my eyes. This was not just mismanagement, this was theft. They had looked me in the eye, complained about the cost of staying alive, and then used that sympathy to fund their golden child's lifestyle. Every swipe of this card was a lie. Every time I paid the bill without checking the details because I trusted them, I was being played. I felt a fool. A successful, educated, professional fool. I spent my days catching executives embezzling millions, yet I had let my own parents rob me blind because I was too afraid to question their medical needs. I hit the print button. The rhythmic sound of the paper feeding through the machine was the only noise in the apartment. I grabbed a red marker from my desk. I started circling the spa, the clothes, the steak dinners, and the insurance. "This changes everything," I whispered to the empty room. Selling the piano was a civil dispute over a trust, but this wire fraud, credit card fraud, elder financial abuse, if they had used any of Nana's info, they had crossed the line from toxic family to criminals, and I was done being the victim. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for the credit card company. It was time to cut the lifeline. The glowing numbers on the computer screen blurred as I was pulled back into the suffocating grip of memory. This financial betrayal was not an isolated incident. It was the climax of a lifetime of inequity. I remembered sitting at the kitchen table when I was 18, holding my acceptance letter to the University of Chicago. It was the only thing I had ever wanted. My father had barely glanced at it before shaking his head. "We do not have the money, Nia," he had said, closing the discussion as if he were deciding on pizza toppings. "You will have to take out loans. We need to preserve our capital for the future." I believed them. I thought they were being fiscally responsible. So I took on the debt. I worked the graveyard shift at a diner smelling of grease and stale coffee while studying for exams. I ate instant noodles and skipped social events to save every penny. I graduated with honors and $50,000 in debt, but I was proud of my independence. I thought I was building character. 2 years later, the truth slapped me in the face. LaToya had dropped out of community college after one semester because she found the early morning classes too stressful. She moved back home and spent her days lounging on the couch. 6 months later, my parents called a family meeting. They were beaming as they slid a set of keys across the table to her. We withdrew from our 401k to put a down payment on a condo for LaToya. My mother announced, her eyes shining with pride. "She needs stability to figure out her path." I sat there stunned into silence. The retirement fund they claimed was too sacred to touch for my education had been gutted to buy a house for the daughter who had quit. When I finally found my voice and asked why, my mother delivered the line that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "Nia, you are a survivor. You are like a cactus, you thrive in the desert. LaToya is an orchid. She is delicate. She needs a greenhouse to bloom." That was the moment I understood my role in this family. I was the retirement plan. I was the safety net. They did not invest in me because they loved me. They relied on me because they needed me to be successful enough to clean up the mess when they spent all their resources on the orchid. For over a decade, I had played my part perfectly. I paid for the anniversary dinners. I covered the flights for family vacations. I gave them this credit card because I felt guilty that they had no savings left. But they had no savings because they had poured every cent into the bottomless pit of LaToya's whims. I looked down at the credit card statement again. The spa treatments, the designer clothes, the insurance for the G Wagon. It was the condo all over again, but this time they were not using their own money. They were using mine. The anger that rose in my chest was different this time. It was not the hot, reactive anger of a jealous sibling. It was the cold, calculating fury of a creditor who had finally realized the borrower was bankrupt. The cactus was done bleeding water for the orchid. I owed the 18-year-old girl who worked double shifts a debt, and I was going to collect it starting now. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Brad. "Coffee at the grind. We need to clear the air. 10 a.m. I almost ignored it, but my forensic instinct kicked in. Criminals love to talk. They love to rationalize their actions, and if you let them speak long enough, they usually incriminate themselves. I arrived 5 minutes early, securing a corner table that offered a clear view of the entrance. Brad arrived 10 minutes late, breezing in with the confidence of a man who actually had a job to go to. He didn't order anything, just sat down across from me and flashed a blinding, practiced smile. "Glad you came, Nia," he said, leaning back and spreading his arms along the top of the booth. "Yesterday got a little heated. I wanted to make sure we're good. Family comes first, right?" I stared at him over the rim of my black coffee. "You sold my grandmother's piano, Brad. We are far from good." He waved a hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. "Water under the bridge. Look, I didn't ask you here to rehash the past. I asked you here because I see potential in you. You're a grinder. I respect that. But let's be real. You're working yourself to death for a paycheck while inflation eats your savings." Here it comes, I thought. The pitch. "I've started a new private equity fund." Brad continued, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "High-yield, crypto-backed, exclusive to friends and family. I'm usually strict about the buy-in, but since you're family, I'm willing to let you in on the ground floor. I can take that nest egg of yours and triple it in 6 months." I set my cup down slowly. You want me to invest with you? After you just liquidated a family heirloom for cash. Brad sighed, looking at me with feigned sympathy. See, this is your problem, Nia. You're too emotional about money. You hold on to it too tight because you're scared. He leaned in closer, his cologne overpowering the smell of roasted beans. I know how it is for women like you. You've got that strong black woman armor on tight. You think you don't need anyone. But deep down, it's lonely at the top, isn't it? My jaw tightened. I couldn't believe the audacity. You're successful, sure, he went on, oblivious to the ice in my glare. But you're spiritually exhausted. You need a man to step in and lead. Not just in life, but financially. Let me carry that burden for you. Let me guide your portfolio so you can focus on finding a husband. Or whatever it is you do in that empty apartment. He sat back looking satisfied, as if he had just bestowed wisdom upon a lost child. He genuinely believed he was the savior in this narrative. He thought he could insult my independence, prey on my insecurities about being single, and walk away with a check. So he said, tapping his fingers on the table, "What do you say, 50,000 to start? I'll even waive the management fee for the first month." I looked at him. Really looked at him. I saw the desperation behind his eyes, the cheap suit, the way he checked his phone nervously when he thought I wasn't looking. He wasn't a financial guru, he was drowning, and he was trying to use me as a life raft. "That's an interesting offer, Brad," I said, keeping my voice dangerously even. "Tell me more about how this fund is structured, specifically how you're leveraging the assets." I didn't tell him yes, I didn't tell him no, I just wanted him to keep talking. Because every word he said was another nail in his coffin. I kept my face neutral, a mask of professional curiosity that I had perfected over a decade of sitting across from embezzling CEOs. Under the table, my hand slipped quietly into my open purse. My fingers found the volume button on the side of my phone, triggering the shortcut I had programmed years ago for client meetings. One long press. A subtle vibration against my palm confirmed that the voice memo app was running. The red recording light was now blinking silently in the darkness of my bag, ready to catch every lie he was about to spill. "That is an ambitious projection, Brad," I said, keeping my voice level to ensure the microphone picked up clear audio. "But I know for a fact that you have had liquidity issues in the past. I cannot put $50,000 into a fund if you are operating without a reserve. If the market turns, what is your safety net?" Brad laughed, a sharp sound that lacked any genuine warmth. He looked around the coffee shop to ensure no one was within earshot, then leaned across the table, his eyes gleaming with the arrogance of a man who thinks he is the smartest person in the room. "That is the beauty of this family arrangement, Nia. The safety net is already secured." He took a sip of his espresso, savoring the secret he was about to share. "Between you and me, Desmond and Viola have already pledged a significant capital injection to the fund in the next quarter. We are just waiting for the funds to clear." I frowned, feigning confusion. "My parents do not have capital, Brad. They just sold a piano to buy a car. If they had money to invest, they would not have needed to pawn an heirloom." "Not current capital," Brad corrected, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Future capital. We are leveraging the matriarch's life insurance policy. It is a legacy plan worth $500,000. The doctors say she does not have long, maybe a few weeks at most. Once that payout hits, your parents are funneling 80% of it into my firm to secure LaToya's future. It is a guaranteed influx." The world seemed to stop spinning. The noise of the espresso machine and the chatter of the morning crowd faded into a dull roar. I felt a coldness spread through my veins that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. They were not just selling furniture, they were betting on Nana's death. They were practically checking their watches, waiting for her heart to stop beating so they could cash out and hand the money to this con artist. They had already spent her life insurance in their minds. I stared at Brad, fighting the urge to throw my scalding coffee in his face. He was smiling, thinking he had impressed me with his financial acumen. He saw Nana as a liquidity event. He saw her death as a business transaction. Wow, I managed to say, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. That is a very solid plan. Brad winked. Like I said, I look out for the family. So are you in? I forced the corners of my mouth up into a smile. Let me look at my liquidity, I said. I will let you know. I stood up, my legs feeling heavy. Brad remained seated, looking triumphant. He thought he had hooked a new investor. He had no idea he had just confessed to conspiracy on tape. I walked out of the coffee shop, clutching my purse to my chest. The recording was safe. I had the smoking gun. Now I just needed to make sure Nana lived long enough to pull the trigger. I walked back to my apartment, the recording of Brad's confession burning a hole in my digital pocket. I needed a moment to decompress before I called the lawyer, so I made the mistake of opening Instagram. It was right there at the top of my feed, posted 5 minutes ago. The algorithm knew exactly how to torture me. There was Latoya perched on the hood of the black G Wagon like a music video extra. She was wearing a pair of oversized sunglasses and holding a bottle of champagne, probably paid for with my credit card. The sunlight hit the car's emblem perfectly, a calculated glare meant to blind anyone scrolling by. She had tagged herself at our parents' address, but the location tag read, Success Lane. I clicked more to read the caption, and I actually gagged. God always provides for his toughest soldiers. When you grind in silence, the blessings roar in public. So thankful for this new chapter and my amazing husband for making it happen. New whip, new levels. Hashtag blessed, hashtag boss mom, hashtag grind never stops, hashtag G-class. The audacity was breathtaking. Grind in silence. The only thing Latoya ground was my parents' retirement savings and my patience. She hadn't worked a day since 2019. Her job was posting motivational quotes over pictures of other people's vacations and attributing the car to God and Brad. It was blasphemy and fraud wrapped in a Valencia filter. I scrolled down to the comments, punishing myself. Yas, queen. You deserve it, wrote her best friend Tiffany, who knew for a fact Latoya had borrowed rent money from me last month. Hard work pays off. So proud of you, commented an aunt who hadn't spoken to me in years because I didn't lend her money for a pyramid scheme. And then, the kicker. A comment from Brad. Only the best for my queen. You make this family look good. I threw my phone onto the couch cushion. They were creating a digital paper trail of their own delusion. They were publicly claiming ownership of an asset bought with stolen funds. In a way, it was perfect. They were documenting their own motive. I picked the phone back up. I didn't like the photo. I didn't leave a snarky comment exposing the truth. That would be messy, and I needed to be surgical. Instead, I took a screenshot. Then another. I captured the caption, the date stamp, and Brad's comment claiming he bought it. Keep posting, Latoya, I whispered to the screen. Every like you get is just another piece of evidence for the jury. I saved the images to a folder named Case File on my cloud drive. Seeing the public validation they were receiving made my stomach turn, but it also solidified my resolve. They cared more about the appearance of wealth than the reality of integrity. They wanted the applause of strangers more than the respect of their own blood. The notification bell dinged. Another comment. This one from my mother, my beautiful daughter. You were born to shine. That was it. I closed the app. They were not just thieves, they were narcissists feeding off each other's distortions. I went back to my computer. The nausea was gone, replaced by cold, hard determination. I wasn't just going to take the car back, I was going to dismantle the entire stage they were performing on. My phone rang, slicing through the silence of the apartment like a fire alarm. The caller ID flashed father. I stared at it for a moment, my heart hammering against my ribs. He never called me unless he wanted money or a favor. Today he wanted silence. I answered, putting him on speaker so I could keep typing. Nia, he barked, skipping the pleasantries. I just got off the phone with Dr. Evans at the hospice. He says your grandmother is in a very fragile state. I stopped typing. I was planning to go see her tonight, I said, testing him. Absolutely not. He snapped, his voice pitching up an octave. That is why I am calling. The doctor has ordered a complete lockdown on visitors. No stress, no excitement. And frankly, after your display at the house yesterday, you are the definition of stress. You are banned from the facility until further notice. I gripped the edge of my desk. Banned. He was trying to quarantine the victim from the witness. He was not protecting Nana's heart. He was protecting his own skin. You cannot ban me, Dad. I am her healthcare proxy. Not anymore, he lied smoothly. I reinstated my power of attorney this morning. Do not go there, Nia. If you show up, security will escort you out. Let her rest in peace. The line went dead. He hung up before I could argue, thinking his authority was final. He thought he was the gatekeeper. He forgot that I was the one who paid the bills. I did not call the front desk where my father's instructions would be logged. I dialed the personal cell phone of Mrs. Higgins, the head nurse I had hired privately to ensure Nana got extra care. She answered on the first ring. Nia, honey, I was just about to text you. Did my father call? I asked, grabbing my coat. He called the administration, Mrs. Higgins whispered. He told them you were emotionally unstable and a threat to your grandmother's recovery. He put a block on your name at the security gate. My blood boiled. Is she okay? Is she really too weak to see me? Mrs. Higgins let out a dry, humorless chuckle. Weak. Honey, she is sitting up in bed eating Jell-O and watching Judge Judy. And she is sharp as a tack. She asked me 10 minutes ago why your father was shouting about a Mercedes in the parking lot yesterday. I froze. She heard him. She hears everything Mrs. Higgins said. She told me to tell you to get down here. She said, tell Nia to bring her laptop. We have work to do. I am on my way, I said. But security. Park in the employee lot around back, she instructed. I will prop the delivery door open. Hurry. I grabbed the folder containing the bank statements, the piano appraisal, and the recording of Brad. I did not just walk to the door. I ran. My father thought he could build a wall around the truth. He did not know that Nana Rose was the one who taught me how to climb. I took the elevator down to the garage, my mind racing. They thought she was a helpless old woman fading away in a hospital bed. They were about to find out that Nana Rose was a dormant volcano, and I was bringing the match. I threw my bag into the passenger seat of my sedan and reversed out of my spot tires, screeching slightly on the concrete. I was not just going to visit my grandmother. I was going to a war council. The employee parking lot behind the St. Jude Hospice Center was shrouded in a respectful silence that felt heavy after the noise of my own life. Here there were no revving engines, no shouting matches about money, and no desperate sales pitches. There was only the rustle of dry leaves against the asphalt and the distant rhythmic hum of the building's ventilation system. I grabbed my bag, clutching it like a shield, and checked the delivery entrance Mrs. Higgins had mentioned. It was propped open with a small rubber wedge, just enough for me to slip through. I moved quickly down the linoleum corridor, my sneakers squeaking softly on the polished floor. The air inside smelled of lavender and antiseptic, a scent designed to mask the inevitable reality of this place. My heart hammered against my ribs, not out of fear of death, but out of fear of being caught by my own father's decree. It was absurd that I had to sneak in to see the woman who raised me like a thief in the night while the real thieves were celebrating with champagne in her living room. I felt a surge of resentment. My parents tried to paint this place as a prison where Nana was fading away, unconnected to the world. They used her silence as a cover for their crimes. I reached room 304. The door was slightly ajar. Mrs. Higgins was standing by the window, adjusting the blinds to let in the sliver of afternoon sun. She turned and gave me a curt, conspiratorial nod, pressing a finger to her lips, before slipping out into the hall to stand guard. I turned my attention to the bed. Nana Rose looked smaller than I remembered, as if the weight of the world was finally shrinking her physical form. Her silver hair, usually styled in an impeccable bun, was braided neatly against the white pillow. A web of clear tubes connected her to the rhythmic beep of the monitor, a machine that measured time in heartbeats rather than billable hours. For a terrifying second, I thought my mother was right. I thought maybe I was too late, that the coma was real. She lay so still, her chest rising and falling in shallow, fragile breaths. But then the rhythm of the room changed. As if sensing my presence, Nana's eyelids fluttered. She opened her eyes. They were not cloudy or vacant. They were not the eyes of a woman lost in the fog of dementia or heavy sedation. They were the same piercing, intelligent brown eyes that had stared down segregationists in the 60s and corporate sharks in the 80s. There was no confusion in her gaze, only a simmering intensity that burned brighter than her failing body should have allowed. It was the look of a matriarch who had been watching from the shadows, tallying every sin. I approached the bed slowly, feeling the tears prick my eyes again, not from grief this time, but from relief. I took her hand. Her skin felt like parchment paper, dry and fragile, but her grip tightened around my fingers with surprising strength. She did not say hello. She did not ask how I was. She simply looked at me, scanning my face as if reading a ledger, checking for the damage they had caused. She pulled slightly on my hand, urging me closer. I leaned down, bringing my ear to her lips, terrified that her voice would be nothing but a rasp. Instead, I heard a low, steady sound, vibrating with clarity. She was awake, and she was furious. I pulled the plastic chair closer to the bed, the metal legs scraping softly against the floor. My hands were shaking as I reached for hers again. I had rehearsed this moment in the car, trying to find a way to soften the blow, but looking into her eyes, I knew there was no room for euphemisms. Nana Rose respected strength, not coddling. She deserved the truth, even if it was ugly. Nana, I started, my voice barely a whisper. I need you to listen to me, and I need you to stay calm. The doctor said your heart is weak, but what I have to tell you cannot wait. She squeezed my hand, a silent command to proceed. I took a deep breath. I went to the house yesterday. I stopped. I could not bring myself to say the words. It felt like I was the one betraying her just by vocalizing their crime. Spit it out, child. She rasped, her voice dry but commanding. They sold the piano, Nana. I let the words hang in the air between us. They sold the Steinway. A dealer came yesterday morning. They took $150,000 cash for it. I watched her face, waiting for the devastation. I expected tears. I expected her breathing to hitch. I was ready to call for Mrs. Higgins to bring the defibrillator. But Nana Rose did not cry. She did not gasp. She simply closed her eyes for a long moment, her face an unreadable mask of calm. The only sound in the room was the steady rhythmic beep of the monitor, proving that her heart was not breaking, it was hardening. And the money she asked, opening her eyes. Her gaze was not directed at me, but at the ceiling, as if she were looking through the tiles to the heavens, asking for patience. Where is the money, Nia? They bought a car, I said, the bitterness coating my tongue. A Mercedes G Wagon. Black. The license plate says Toya's Ride. They used the cash from your legacy to buy LaToya a status symbol. Brad convinced them it was an investment. Nana let out a sound that was half laugh, half sigh. It was a terrifying sound. It was the sound of a judge hearing a confession she already expected. So they finally did it, she whispered. I knew they were greedy. I knew they were foolish, but I never thought they would be bold enough to strip the house while I was still breathing. She turned her head slowly to look at me. Her eyes were dry, but they burned with a cold fire. She looked at the laptop bag I had dropped on the floor. You brought the evidence, she stated. It was not a question. Yes, Nana. I have the bank records. I have the appraisal. I even have a recording of Brad admitting to the sale and… I hesitated. And what, Nia? And admitting that they are waiting for your life insurance payout to invest in his crypto fund. For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed her face. Disgust. She pulled her hand from mine and smoothed the blanket over her chest. She looked smaller in that moment, betrayed by the very blood she had nurtured. But then she inhaled deeply, her chest rising against the hospital gown. The frailty vanished. The woman lying there was no longer a patient. She was the woman who had built a real estate portfolio from nothing in the 1970s. She was the boss. "Help me sit up," she ordered. But Nana, the doctor, said. "I do not care what the doctor said," she snapped, her voice gaining strength. "I am not dying today, Nia. Not while those vultures are picking at my bones. Sit me up, we have work to do." Mrs. Higgins pressed the button on the side of the hospital bed, and the mechanical hum filled the room as the mattress slowly elevated. I watched Nana's face grimace slightly with the effort of moving, but she did not make a sound. Once she was upright, she reached up with a trembling hand and pulled the plastic oxygen cannula away from her nose. Mrs. Higgins moved to stop her, but Nana silenced her with a sharp look. "I need to think clearly," she snapped. "And I cannot think with this plastic tube hissing in my ear." She took a breath of unfiltered air. It was shallow but steady. She looked at me, and for a moment I saw the grandmother who used to run board meetings with an iron fist. The frailty was still there in her body, but her mind was sharpening by the second, fueled by the adrenaline of pure indignation. "So they bought a Mercedes," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "A G Wagon. The kind of car rappers drive in music videos." "Yes, Nana," I nodded. She let out a dry, bitter chuckle. "Your mother never did have a mind for value. She only has an eye for price tags. She thinks wealth is something you wear or drive. She never understood that true wealth is what you keep." "That piano was not just an instrument, Nia. Your grandfather bought that for me in 1955. We were not even allowed to buy property in certain neighborhoods back then, but he made sure we had the finest music in our living room. We built a legacy around that soundboard." She looked at her hands, the knuckles swollen with arthritis. "I remember playing Scott Joplin on those keys while your mother was learning to walk. I remember composing the melody for my first real estate commercial on that bench. That wood held 70 years of our history. It held the vibrations of every prayer, every celebration, and every funeral this family has ever seen." She paused, and her eyes narrowed into slits of cold fury. "And they traded it for a car. They sold my past to buy their vanity. They took a piece of history that survived the civil rights movement and sold it to a pawnbroker so LaToya could impress strangers at a stoplight." "It is not just the theft that angers me," she hissed, slamming her hand down on the bedsheet. "It is the disrespect. They think I am already dead. They think I am a corpse that is taking too long to stop breathing, so they decided to start the estate sale early. They are picking the gold fillings out of my teeth while I am still using them to chew." I felt a shiver run down my spine. I had expected her to be hurt. I had expected her to feel betrayed by her daughter. But Nana Rose was past betrayal. She was in the realm of strategic retribution. She was not a mother grieving a wayward child anymore. She was a CEO dealing with embezzlement. She looked at me, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made me want to stand at attention. "You said you have the appraisal." "Yes, Nana, and you know where the money went. Every cent." "Good," she pointed a shaking finger at my bag. "Get your phone. Call Washington. Tell him to get his suit ready. I do not care if it is a Sunday. I do not care if he is on a golf course. Tell him Rose wants to sue her own daughter for grand larceny. And tell him to bring the paperwork to disinherit the whole lot of them. If they want to drive a Mercedes, they can live in it because that is the only roof they are going to have left when I am done with them." I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name Marcus Washington. He was not just a lawyer. He was the keeper of secrets for the entire South Side business district. He had kept my grandfather out of jail in the 80s and helped Nana structure her real estate empire in the 90s. I pressed call. He answered on the second ring, his voice a deep baritone that commanded respect even over a cellular connection. "Nia," he said. "Is everything all right with Rose?" I looked at Nana. She was sitting straighter than I had seen her in years, her jaw set in a line of granite. "She wants to sue," I said into the receiver. "She wants to see you. Now." There was a pause on the other end, then the sound of a chair scraping against a floor and keys jingling. "I will be there in 20 minutes. Do not let anyone else into that room." The wait was agonizing. Mrs. Higgins stood guard at the door like a sentry while I paced the small room. Nana did not speak. She simply stared at the wall, her mind clearly working through decades of legal maneuvers. She was not grieving the loss of the piano anymore. She was calculating the cost of retribution. 19 minutes later, the door to room 304 swung open. Marcus Washington did not look like a man who had been summoned on a Sunday afternoon. He wore a charcoal three-piece suit that was perfectly tailored to his broad frame. He carried a battered leather briefcase that looked like it had survived a war zone. He did not look at me. He walked straight to the bed, ignoring the beeping monitors and the sterile hospital smell. He looked at the woman in the bed. "Hello, Rose," he said, placing his hand gently on hers. "You look ready for a fight." "I am," Nana replied, her voice steady. "Did you bring the ledger?" Washington cracked a rare smile. "I never go anywhere without it. Especially not when your daughter starts making unauthorized withdrawals." He placed the briefcase on the rolling table, usually reserved for hospital food. The sound of the heavy latches clicking open echoed in the quiet room like gunshots. He pulled out a file that was at least 3 inches thick. It was bound in red tape and looked ancient. "I have been tracking the movement on your account since you were admitted," Rose Washington said, opening the file. "I noticed the withdrawal for the insurance payment on the Mercedes yesterday. I assumed you had authorized it in a moment of weakness, but when Nia called, I knew." He turned to me, his eyes dark and serious. "You need to see this, Nia. Your parents did not just sell a piano. They have been trying to pierce the corporate veil of the family trust for 6 months. They failed every time because I blocked them. So they got desperate. They went for the physical assets instead." Nana looked at the file, her expression hardening. "Show her the deed, Marcus. Show her who actually owns that Steinway." Washington flipped through the pages until he found a document yellowed with age but stamped with a fresh official seal. He slid it toward me. I looked at the paper and the words swam before my eyes. It was a transfer of ownership dated 5 years ago. "The Steinway Model B serial number 20458 is hereby transferred into the sole ownership of the Rose Essence Living Trust, with Nia Jenkins named as the sole beneficiary upon the grantor's passing or incapacitation." I looked up at them, my mouth dry. "This means," Washington said, leaning forward, "that your parents did not sell their own property. They sold property belonging to a legal entity." "That is not a civil dispute, Nia. That is felony theft. And because the value exceeds $100,000, it carries a mandatory prison sentence." Nana leaned back against her pillows, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. "They wanted a free ride," she whispered. "I am going to give them a ride straight to the state penitentiary. Now, Marcus, tell us how we set the trap." Washington adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and smoothed the document flat on the bedside table. He looked at me with the intensity of a prosecutor closing a case. "You need to understand the structure of your grandmother's estate, Nia. 5 years ago, when Rose had her first heart scare, we restructured everything to protect the assets from exactly this kind of predatory behavior. We created the Rose Essence Living Trust." He tapped the paper with a thick finger. "Clause 4, Section B specifically lists tangible personal property of significant value. The primary item listed is the 1920 Steinway Model B serial number 20458. I squinted at the legal jargon. The date of transfer was indeed 5 years ago. Washington continued, his voice low and clinical. "On that date, legal title of the piano passed from Rose Jenkins, the individual, to the Rose Essence Living Trust. Your grandmother was the initial trustee, but the document names you, Nia, as the successor trustee for this specific asset class upon any medical event requiring hospitalization." He looked up, his eyes locking onto mine. "That means as of yesterday, when your grandmother was admitted here, you became the legal guardian of that piano. Your parents did not just sell their mother's old furniture, they liquidated a protected trust asset without the trustee's consent. In the state of Illinois, that is not a family misunderstanding. That is theft of trust property. I felt a cold chill run through me. Theft. It gets worse, Washington said, flipping to the next page. Because the appraised value of the instrument exceeds $100,000, this falls under the category of a Class 1 felony. We are not talking about a slap on the wrist or probation. We are talking about a mandatory minimum prison sentence of 4 to 15 years. He leaned back, letting the weight of those numbers settle in the room. Your parents and your brother-in-law just committed a major financial crime. They fenced stolen goods to a dealer. They committed wire fraud by accepting the cash. And they committed insurance fraud by using your credit card to insure a vehicle bought with illicit funds. I looked at Nana. She was watching me closely, gauging my reaction. They did not know, I whispered. They thought it was just stuff in the living room. Ignorance of the law is not a defense, Nana said, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. They knew that piano was promised to you. They knew I valued it above everything else. They simply did not care. They gambled that I would die before I could stop them, or that you would be too weak to fight them. Washington closed the folder with a snap. They gambled wrong. We have them on a silver platter, Nia. We can have the police at their door in an hour. We can have the G Wagon impounded before the engine cools down. I looked at the deed in my hand. It was not just a piece of paper. It was a weapon. For years, my parents had wielded guilt and obligation like a sword to cut me down. Now I held the shield. No, I said slowly, a plan forming in my mind. Not yet. If we arrest them now, they will play the victim. They will cry to the family that it was an honest mistake. I want them to dig the hole deeper. Nana smiled, a slow, terrifying smile that mirrored my own. I taught you well. Washington raised an eyebrow. What do you have in mind? I looked at the lawyer, then at my grandmother. They want to celebrate, I said. Let them celebrate. Let them show that car to the world. Let them invite every important person they know to envy their success. I want them standing on the highest pedestal possible when we kick it out from under them. Washington looked at me with a mixture of professional concern and personal intrigue. You want to delay filing the police report? He asked, tapping his pen against the leather briefcase. Every hour we wait is an hour they have to hide the assets or damage the vehicle. If they crash that car, the value of our recovery drops to zero. Nana shook her head slowly. They will not damage it, Marcus. You do not scratch a trophy. You polish it. You parade it around town. That car is the only thing they care about right now. It is their proof that they are better than everyone else. And I want them to feel that superiority deep in their bones. I want them to believe they got away with it completely. She turned to me, her eyes gleaming with a strategic brilliance that belied her physical frailty. If we arrest them now, they will spin a story. They will tell the family it was a misunderstanding, that they intended to pay the trust back. They will cry and play the victims of a cruel legal technicality. But if we let them celebrate, if we let them stand in front of their friends and brag about how smart they are, then we catch them not just in a crime, but in a lie. We catch them in their arrogance. I nodded, seeing the picture she was painting. Exactly. I want witnesses. I want Brad's investors there. I want Mom's church friends there. I want them to publicize their own funeral. Washington sighed, closing the folder, but a small smile played on his lips. You two are dangerous. All right. I can hold off on the filing for 48 hours, but we need to secure the perimeter. I will have a private investigator keep eyes on the vehicle to ensure it does not leave the state. Nana pointed a finger at me. You have a role to play, Nia, and it is going to be the hardest acting job of your life. You have to go back there. You have to apologize. I felt my stomach tighten. Apologize to them, after what they said to me. You have to feed their ego, Nana said sternly. Tell them you were jealous. Tell them you see the wisdom of their investment now. Tell them you want to make it right by throwing a celebration dinner, a car warming party. Make it lavish. Make it expensive. Make it the kind of event Brad cannot resist because it makes him look like a king. I understood. I had to become the defeated scapegoat again. I had to let them trample me one last time so they would not see the trapdoor I was building under their feet. I can do that, I said, my voice steady. I will offer to host it at the Onyx Room. It is the most expensive steakhouse in the city. Brad has been dying to get a reservation there for years. Good, Nana said, leaning back against the pillows, her strength finally starting to wane, but her spirit burning bright. Book it for tomorrow night. Tell them I am asleep. Tell them I am fading fast. Give them every reason to believe the coast is clear. I stood up and kissed her forehead. She smelled of lavender and steel. I will make you proud, Nana. She squeezed my hand one last time. You already have. Now go. The wolves are hungry. Go feed them. I walked out of the hospice center with Washington by my side. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. I was not just Nia the accountant anymore. I was the architect of their destruction. I got into my car and checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I practiced my sad, apologetic smile. It looked convincing. I picked up my phone and dialed my mother's number. It was time to set the stage. The Onyx Room. Brad repeated the name, rolling off his tongue like a fine wine. He leaned back in his chair, the chicken leg forgotten, a predator sensing a bigger kill. Now you are speaking my language, Nia. That is not just a restaurant. That is an institution. If we are going there, we need to do this right. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his thumbs flying across the screen. I am not just bringing the family. I am calling the Sterling partners. They have been hesitant to commit to the crypto fund because they think I lack liquidity. But if they see us at the chef's table popping bottles with that G Wagon parked out front with the valet, that closes the deal. Perception is reality, remember? My mother clasped her hands together, beaming. Oh, Brad, that is brilliant. A business dinner and a celebration wrapped in one. You are always thinking ahead. I forced myself to nod, suppressing the urge to vomit. That is a great idea, Brad, I said, my voice steady. Invite them all. The more the merrier. If we are going to celebrate LaToya's new status, we should have an audience. Brad pointed a grease-stained finger at me. And make sure you book the private reserve wine list. None of that house red you usually drink. These are high-net-worth individuals, Nia. We need to project abundance. If you are going to host, do not be cheap. Do not embarrass us. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. I am paying Brad. You can order whatever you want. He smirked, satisfied. Good. Finally, you are stepping up. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the car again. I will tell the valet to keep it right in front. Under the spotlight. I want everyone who walks in that restaurant to know who owns the pavement. I watched him, preening, his arrogance swelling to fill the room. He was digging his own grave with a golden shovel. He was inviting the very people whose opinion mattered most to him to witness his destruction. He was turning a family dinner into a public spectacle, exactly as Nana had predicted. I stood up, gripping my purse strap. I will make the calls, I said. 7 p.m. sharp. Don't be late. As I walked to the door, my father called out. And Nia, try to wear something brighter. You look like you are going to a funeral. I stopped, my hand on the doorknob. A funeral. The irony was almost too sweet. I turned back and gave him a thin, tight smile. Don't worry, Dad. I will dress for the occasion. I walked out into the night air, the adrenaline finally crashing into exhaustion. They had taken the bait. They had swallowed it whole. Brad was inviting his investors. My parents were inviting their pride. And I was inviting the law. I sat in my car and sent a text to Washington. The trap is set. The Onyx Room, 7 p.m. Brad is bringing witnesses. Washington's reply came instantly. Perfect. The police will be ready for dessert. I started the engine, leaving the G Wagon gleaming in the driveway. Enjoy it tonight, LaToya, I whispered. Because tomorrow, that car becomes evidence. And this family dinner is going to be your last meal as free citizens. The conference room in Marcus Washington's law firm smelled of lemon polish and old paper. It was a stark contrast to the chaos I had been living in for the past 48 hours. I sat at the mahogany table, my hands clasped tight to stop them from shaking. Washington sat opposite me, flanked by a man in a rumpled suit who introduced himself as Detective Miller from the Financial Crimes Division. "We have the final piece of the puzzle," Washington said, sliding a USB drive across the table. "When you told me the time frame of the theft, I sent my investigator to canvass your parents' neighborhood. Most people ignore their neighbors, but Mrs. Gable across the street watches everything. She has a high-definition doorbell camera that points directly at your parents' driveway." He plugged the drive into his laptop and turned the screen toward me. I leaned in, my breath hitching in my throat. The video was time-stamped 2 days ago at 9 in the morning. I watched in silence as a white box truck pulled up to the curb. 2 men in blue coveralls jumped out. Then the front door of my childhood home opened. There was my father. He was holding a coffee mug, pointing casually toward the living room. My mother stepped out behind him, still in her bathrobe, gesturing impatiently. I watched the movers go inside. Moments later, they emerged carrying the body of the Steinway. It was wrapped in moving blankets, but I knew the curve of that wood better than I knew my own face. They hoisted it onto the truck with a careless thud that made me flinch even though I was watching a recording. Then came the exchange. A man in a leather jacket stepped out of a sedan parked behind the truck. He handed my father a thick white envelope. My father didn't even count it. He just shook the man's hand and patted the envelope against his palm. Detective Miller spoke up, his voice gravelly and serious. "That is the money shot, Ms. Jenkins. Literally. We have the item leaving the premises. We have the exchange of cash. And thanks to the trust documents Mr. Washington provided, we can prove your father had no legal right to authorize that movement. This isn't a civil dispute anymore. We have intent action and receipt of illicit funds." I stared at the freeze-framed image of my father shaking hands with the fence. He looked so pleased with himself. He looked like a man who thought he had just pulled off the deal of the century. Washington closed the laptop. "We have enough for an immediate arrest warrant. Detective Miller is ready to execute it." I looked at the detective. "The dinner is tonight at 7, I said. "At the Onyx Room." Miller nodded, jotting something in his notebook. "We will coordinate with the restaurant management. We don't want to cause a panic, but we want to make sure the subjects are contained. We will move in once they are seated and the perimeter is secure. We will have units waiting by the valet stand to secure the vehicle as well." It felt surreal. I was planning a police raid on my own family. But then I remembered Nana's face in the hospital bed. I remembered the text from Brad mocking my loneliness. I remembered the empty corner in the living room. "Do it," I said, my voice hard. "They wanted a show. Let's give them a finale they will never forget." Washington stood up and shook my hand. "Go get ready for dinner, Nia. Wear something nice. Justice looks good in black." I walked out of the office into the bustling city street. The wind was cold, but I didn't feel it. I felt the weight of the evidence in my mind, the video file, the bank statements, the recording. The trap was not just set, it was baited, and the jaws were made of steel. Tonight, the gavel would fall not in a courtroom, but over a plate of Wagyu beef. I arrived at the Onyx Room exactly at 7. The restaurant was a cavern of dark wood, polished brass, and low atmospheric lighting that made everyone look richer and more beautiful than they actually were. A jazz trio played softly in the corner, the kind of unobtrusive music designed to facilitate deals and cover quiet conversations. I wore a simple black sheath dress and my highest heels. It was armor. I felt less like I was attending a dinner and more like I was stepping into an arena. The valet stand was already a scene. The black Mercedes G Wagon was parked directly in front, gleaming under the awning lights like a deity on an altar. My family was standing next to it, posing for photos. LaToya was the center of attention, as always. She wore a fire-engine red cocktail dress that was too tight and too short for the occasion, but no one would dare tell her that. Around her neck and wrists glittered diamond jewelry that I recognized immediately from the Nordstrom charge on my credit card statement. She looked like a walking felony. My mother was fussing over Latoya's hair while my father stood with his chest puffed out, accepting congratulations from Brad's business partners who were just arriving. Brad was in his element, shaking hands, clapping backs, and gesturing toward the car as if he had personally built it. He saw me approaching and waved me over, a smug grin plastered on his face. "There she is, the hostess with the mostess," he boomed loud enough for his partners to hear. "Everyone, this is my sister-in-law, Nia. She is a forensic accountant. Very serious stuff." She finally came to her senses and realized, "You have to spend money to make money, right, Nia?" I forced a tight smile. "That is right, Brad. Tonight is all about recognizing value." Latoya looked me up and down, her eyes lingering critically on my simple dress. "A little understated for a celebration, do not you think?" She sniffed. "But then you always did prefer to fade into the background." "I prefer to let the guest of honor shine," I replied, my voice level. "After all, you have so much to show off tonight." I gestured toward the diamonds on her wrist. "Those are stunning." Latoya held up her arm, twisting it so the stones caught the light. "Are not they? Brad bought them for me to match the car. He spoils me." Another lie. Another piece of evidence for the file. I looked past them toward the restaurant entrance. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a man in a rumpled suit reading a newspaper by the door. "Detective Miller." He gave me a microscopic nod. The trap was secure. "Shall we go inside?" I said, ushering them toward the entrance. "Our table is ready." As we walked into the restaurant, heads turned. Not because of Latoya's dress or Brad's loud voice, but because of the sheer force of their collective entitlement. They walked like they owned the place. They had no idea that in less than 2 hours, they would not even own the clothes on their backs. I walked behind them, silent and watchful, the hunter trailing her prey into the final clearing. The air smelled of expensive perfume, roasting meat, and impending doom. The waiters had just cleared the appetizer plates, leaving behind the faint scent of truffle oil and seared scallops, when Brad decided it was time to hold court. He stood up, tapping his knife against his crystal wine glass. The sharp ring cut through the low hum of conversation in the private dining room. He buttoned his suit jacket, a gesture meant to convey authority, and looked around the table with a satisfied smirk. To his left, the two senior partners from Sterling Capital looked up from their phones, their interest piqued. To his right, my parents beamed with anticipation like children waiting for a magic trick. "Gentlemen, family." Brad began, his voice booming slightly too loud for the intimate space. "I want to propose a toast, not just to the incredible meal Nia has so graciously arranged, although the Wagyu is exceptional, but to something more enduring, to vision." He raised his glass high, the deep red wine catching the candlelight. "In this business and in life, there are those who wait for things to happen, and there are those who make things happen. We talk a lot about ROI, about yield, about leverage, but the greatest investment a man can make is not in a coin or a stock. It is in his bloodline. It is in the safety and status of his family." I gripped the stem of my own glass, watching the performance with a mix of fascination and revulsion. He was using the same sales pitch on his family that he used to scam investors. "When I look at my beautiful wife," Latoya, Brad continued, gesturing to my sister, who was practically glowing with self-importance, "I see the mother of my children. I see the backbone of this clan. And in this dangerous world, a queen needs a fortress. That is why I made the decision this week to upgrade our lifestyle." That obsidian black G Wagon parked out front is not just a car. It is a statement. It says that the Millers do not just survive. We thrive. One of the investors, a balding man with a heavy gold watch, nodded appreciatively. "That is a hell of a machine, Brad. Shows you are liquid. Shows you have staying power." "Exactly," Brad said, pointing a finger at him. "Liquidity is king. And I wanted to show my partners and my in-laws that when you invest with me, you are investing in a winner. I did not finance that car. I did not lease it. I bought it. Cash on the barrelhead. Because that is how we operate. No debt, just power." My mother let out a little gasp of theatrical delight, clapping her hands together softly. "Oh, Brad, you are too good to her, a real provider." Latoya looked up at him, her eyes shining with genuine adoration for the lie. "Thank you, baby. You always take care of us." I watched the investors exchange impressed glances. They were eating it up. Brad had successfully framed the purchase as a result of his own financial genius. He had just publicly claimed credit for a transaction funded entirely by stealing from a dying woman. He was not just lying to his wife, he was lying to potential business partners about his solvency. This was fraud on a multi-layered level. I took a slow sip of my water. He was digging the hole so deep he would never climb out. He had just confirmed to witnesses that he was the source of the funds. He had tied himself inextricably to the crime. To the G Wagon, Brad finished raising his glass higher, and to the new era of prosperity for this family. To the G Wagon, the table echoed in unison. I raised my glass but did not drink. I looked at the dark liquid, thinking of ink on an indictment. Enjoy the toast, Brad, I thought, because the hangover is going to be brutal. As he sat down looking like a man who had conquered the world, I saw him check his phone and wink at the investors. He thought he had closed the deal. He had no idea he had just closed his own case file. With the applause dying down, my father apparently felt the urge to assert his own dominance. He did not want to be outdone by his son-in-law, even if he was riding his coattails. He snapped his fingers at a passing waiter, a gesture so rude it made me wince. "Garçon," he barked, though the man's name tag clearly read Steve. "Send over the sommelier. We are celebrating, and this house wine simply will not do." When the sommelier arrived, a tall woman with an air of patience. She likely developed, dealing with people exactly like my parents. My father did not ask for a recommendation. He snatched the leather-bound reserve list from her hands. He ran his finger down the price column, not the vintage column. That was his tell. He did not care about the grapes. He cared about the number. "We will take the Chateau Lafite Rothschild," he announced loud enough for the next table to hear. "2 bottles. And bring a round of your finest cognac for the gentleman to finish with." I watched the sommelier raise an eyebrow. "Excellent choice, sir. That is the 2010 vintage. It is $4,000 a bottle." My mother gasped, but it was a gasp of delight, not shock. She turned to the investors, her eyes glittering. "Only the best for our guests. We believe in abundance in this family. We do not count pennies when we are making millions." Brad laughed, slapping the table. "That is right, Viola. Pour it up. Put it on the tab." I sat there doing the mental math. $8,000 for wine. Another $500 for the cognac, plus the steaks, the sides, and the service charge. The bill was rapidly approaching $15,000. They were ordering like oligarchs, completely secure in the knowledge that they wouldn't have to pay a dime. They assumed that either I would cover it out of familial guilt, or Brad would cover it with the money he expected to drain from Nana's life insurance. It was a frenzy of consumption. My mother ordered the seafood tower, piling her plate with lobster tails and king crab legs. Latoya ordered a second dessert, taking one bite before pushing it away because she was too full. My father swirled his $4,000 wine, lecturing the table on the importance of knowing one's worth. "You see," he said, pointing his fork at me. "This is what you don't understand, Nia. You save, save, save. You live like a pauper because you are afraid. We live like kings because we know the universe provides. Look at this table. Look at that car outside. This is manifestation." I looked at the grease on his chin and the wine stain on his teeth. It was not manifestation. It was gluttony. They were gorging themselves on the carcass of their own integrity. They were eating away their freedom bite by expensive bite. "I beg your pardon, Dad," I said, taking a sip of my water. "You are right. I have been too cautious. I should enjoy this moment." I signaled the waiter. "Bring another bottle." I said, my voice calm. "If we are celebrating, let's not run dry." My father beamed at me, thinking he had finally broken my spirit. "That is my girl, finally learning how to live." I smiled back. I wanted the bill to be astronomical. I wanted the theft of services charge to be added to the list. I wanted the judge to see exactly how much they felt entitled to consume. Drink up, I thought. The water in prison is going to taste very different. The vibration of my phone against the white tablecloth was the only thing that cut through the haze of cigar smoke and self-congratulation that hung over our table. The dinner had devolved into a spectacle of excess. My father was loudly recounting a business deal from 1995 that never actually happened, while my mother was trying to convince the Sterling partners that LaToya had been a child prodigy. Brad was busy ordering another round of cognac, his face flushed with the kind of confidence that only comes from spending other people's money. I looked down at the screen. It was a message from Mrs. Higgins. Attached was a photo. I opened it, shielding the screen from prying eyes. It was Nana. She was sitting up in her hospital bed, wearing her reading glasses, looking straight into the camera lens. She looked fierce. She looked alive. Below the image was a text message dictated by the matriarch herself. I am watching. Finish them. A cold thrill raced down my spine. She knew. Even from her hospice bed, she was pulling the strings. She was not just a victim waiting for justice. She was the general commanding the battlefield. She wanted their heads. She wanted the show to end. I looked up from the phone and surveyed the table one last time. I looked at the grease on my father's chin. I looked at the wine stains on the tablecloth. I looked at the diamond bracelet on LaToya's wrist that sparkled under the chandelier light. They looked like vultures who had gorged themselves too full to fly. They had no idea that the ground beneath them had already crumbled. They were laughing, clinking glasses, completely oblivious to the sword hanging by a thread above their heads. I slipped the phone back into my purse. The time for acting was over. The time for the humble, apologetic daughter was gone. I took a sip of my water, clearing my throat. It was time to deliver the punchline to this cruel joke. I stood up slowly. I did not tap my glass like Brad did. I did not need to make noise to get attention. I simply stood there, silent and still, until the sheer weight of my presence forced them to look at me. One by one, the conversation died down. The investors looked up, curious. My parents looked annoyed at the interruption. Brad looked confused. "Nia, sit down." My father slurred, waving a hand. "We are in the middle of a story." I ignored him. I looked directly at Brad, then at my parents, then at LaToya. My expression was no longer the mask of the defeated sister. It was the face of the forensic accountant who had found the missing millions. It was the face of Nana Rose. "I have a toast too," I said, my voice clear and carrying to the corners of the room. Brad spoke about vision. He spoke about legacy. He spoke about how this family makes things happen. And he is right. We do make things happen. I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. But there is one thing Brad forgot to mention about how he operates. I turned to the investors, locking eyes with the senior partner. He forgot to mention where the money comes from. Brad's smile faltered. His eyes darted around the room, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. "Naya, what are you doing?" "Sit down. You are drunk." "I am stone cold sober, Brad," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "And that is the problem. Because I am the only one here who knows exactly who paid for this dinner." I picked up my purse and pulled out the thick white envelope Washington had given me. I tossed it onto the center of the table. It landed with a heavy thud right next to the empty bottle of Chateau Lafite. It was not a check. It was a copy of the police warrant. "Nana sends her regards," I said softly. "And she wants her piano back." The heavy thud of the warrant on the table was followed by the soft, polite cough of the waiter. He materialized at Brad's elbow, holding a black leather folder. The timing was impeccable. I had signaled him the moment I stood up. "Check for the table, sir," the waiter said, placing the folder directly in front of Brad. The room was deadly silent. My parents were staring at the warrant envelope, confusion clouding their wine-soaked brains. But Brad, ever the performer, tried to regain control. He laughed, a nervous braying sound. Of course, of course." He snatched the bill, trying to look casual. "Just a little family drama, gentlemen. Nothing to worry about. Nia has always been a bit theatrical." He opened the folder. I watched his eyes scan the total. I saw the moment the number hit him. His confident grin twitched. $8,450 plus tip. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. He pulled out the platinum card, the one I knew was maxed out from his crypto losses last month. He handed it to the waiter with a flourish. "Put it on this, and add 20% for your trouble." The waiter took the card and walked toward the portable terminal on the side station. I didn't sit down. I remained standing, watching. "You might want to have a backup card ready, Brad," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. Brad glared at me. "Shut up, Naya. You are embarrassing yourself." The waiter returned faster than usual. He leaned down, his voice dropping to a discreet whisper that was still audible in the silent room. "I am sorry, sir." The card was declined. Brad's face turned a shade of puce that clashed with his tie. "Try it again. It's a platinum card. There's a glitch in your system. I tried it twice, sir. The bank has put a hold on the account." My father, sensing the humiliation, jumped in. "Here, use mine." He pulled out the emergency medical card, the one I paid for. The one I had canceled 3 hours ago. The waiter took it, walked back to the machine, and returned 10 seconds later. "Declined, sir. Reported lost or stolen." My father looked at me, betrayal dawning in his eyes. "Nia." I smiled. It was a cold, sharp thing. "That card is for medical emergencies, Dad. This?" I gestured to the table littered with lobster shells and empty wine bottles. "This is not an emergency. This is theft." The investors were shifting in their seats now. The senior partner from Sterling Capital cleared his throat. "Brad, perhaps we should call it a night." No. Brad stood up, panic setting in. "It is just a misunderstanding. I have the cash. I have liquid assets." I picked up the warrant envelope from the table and held it up. "Actually, Brad, you don't. Because the only liquid asset you had was stolen from a trust fund, and the real owner is calling in the debt." I looked at the waiter. "I am not paying for this. And neither are they. But I believe there is a brand new Mercedes G Wagon out front. I am sure the dealership will give you a good trade-in value on the keys," Latoya shrieked. "You can't touch my car." "It is not your car, Latoya," I said, dropping the veneer of politeness completely. "It is evidence." And speaking of evidence, I turned toward the entrance. Detective Miller was walking through the door, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. The game was over. The check had arrived, and the cost was going to be a lot higher than $8,000. The waiter stared at Brad with a look of practiced indifference, holding the card out like it was a contagious disease. "Declined," he repeated, his voice flat enough to iron a shirt on. "Do you have another form of payment?" Brad snatched the card back, his face glistening with a sudden sheen of sweat that had nothing to do with the spicy appetizers. He laughed, a high-pitched, nervous sound that echoed horribly in the silent room. "That is ridiculous. It is a platinum card. There must be a problem with your machine. The chip is sensitive. Wipe it and run it again." The waiter sighed, a sound that conveyed he had done this dance 1,000 times before. He took the card back and inserted it slowly, letting everyone at the table watch. The little machine whirred. The screen flashed blue. Then a sharp, angry beep cut through the air. "Transaction not authorized." The red light on the terminal blinked mockingly. Brad looked at the investors from Sterling Capital. Their amused expressions had vanished, replaced by the stony faces of men who realized they were wasting their time. "Fraud protection," Brad stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the machine. "The bank is just being overzealous because of the large purchase I made yesterday. The car, you know, they flag big spenders." The senior partner, Mr. Sterling, did not smile. He checked his Rolex. "It seems your bank is saving you from yourself, Brad." Desperation clawed at Brad's throat. He turned to Latoya, who was freezing in her seat, clutching her diamond bracelet as if it might disappear. "Latoya, give him your card. The business account." Latoya's eyes went wide. But that is for the house expenses, Brad. You said not to touch it. Just give him the damn card. Brad snapped the mask of the doting husband, crumbling into dust. Latoya flinched, digging into her clutch with trembling fingers. She pulled out a sleek black card and handed it to the waiter, trying to muster a shred of dignity. It has a high limit, she whispered to the table, though she sounded like she was trying to convince herself. The waiter took it. Swipe. Wait. Beep. Insufficient funds. The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Latoya gasped. That is impossible. There was $10,000 in there yesterday. I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hand. Actually, I said, my voice cutting through the panic. There was $10,000. But then someone paid a $5,000 insurance premium on a car they could not afford, and someone else transferred the rest to an offshore crypto exchange at 3 this morning. Brad spun around to look at me, his eyes bulging. How do you know that? Because I track the money, Brad, and right now you have zero. The atmosphere in the room plummeted. The illusion of wealth which had been holding the entire evening together evaporated instantly. Mr. Sterling stood up, tossing his linen napkin onto the table. It landed on a plate of half-eaten lobster, a perfect metaphor for the night. I think we have seen enough, Sterling said, buttoning his jacket. We do not partner with people who cannot pay their dinner bill, let alone manage a fund. Come on, gentlemen. Wait. Brad scrambled up, knocking his chair over. It is a mistake. I can wire the funds. I have assets. Sterling didn't even look back. He walked out, his associates trailing behind him, leaving my family alone in the center of the restaurant. My father sat stunned, holding his empty wine glass. My mother was pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Latoya was staring at her declined card on the table. They were alone with the bill, the shame, and the truth. And I was just getting started. The heavy oak doors at the front of the private dining room swung open with a force that made the crystal glasses on the table tremble. It was not the waiter returning with a manager to scold us. It was a wall of navy blue uniforms. The hum of conversation from the main dining hall, cut off instantly, replaced by a tense, heavy silence. Detective Miller walked in first, his badge gleaming under the warm chandelier light like a cold steel star. He did not look like he was there to make a reservation. He looked like a man who was about to ruin several lives, and he was completely at peace with it. He stopped at the head of the table, his eyes scanning the faces of my family with a detached professional scrutiny. He looked at the half-eaten lobster. He looked at the empty bottles of wine. Finally, his gaze landed on the Mercedes key fob sitting next to Latoya's declined credit card. He did not shout. He did not draw his weapon. He simply spoke, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that carried more weight than any scream. Who is the primary driver of the black Mercedes-Benz SUV with the custom license plate Toya's ride? Latoya blinked, her survival instinct warring with her vanity. For a second she looked like she might deny it, like she might claim she had never seen the car before. But the habit of entitlement was too strong. She stood up, smoothing her red dress, trying to summon the arrogance that had protected her for 30 years. It is my car, she said, her voice trembling slightly, but chin lifted in defiance. Is there a problem, officer? Did the valet park it in a fire lane? Miller did not smile. He reached for his belt and unhooked a pair of metal handcuffs. The sound of the ratchet clicking open was louder than a gunshot in the quiet room. You are under arrest for possession of stolen property and conspiracy to commit felony theft, Miller stated, moving toward her with efficient, terrifying speed. Latoya's jaw dropped, her face draining of all color. Stolen? That is ridiculous. My husband bought that car for me yesterday. It is brand new. Miller turned his gaze to Brad, who was backing away until his legs hit the wall. Brad Miller, he said. You are also under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and financial abuse of an elder. Brad held up his hands, his palms sweating. No, wait. You have this all wrong. It was a family matter. We sold some old furniture. It was a civil exchange. We have the receipt. It was theft of trust assets, Miller corrected, grabbing Brad's wrist and spinning him around. The Steinway piano you sold did not belong to you or your in-laws. It belonged to the Rose Essence Living Trust. By selling it, you stole $150,000 from a protected legal entity. And by crossing state lines to sell it to a known fence, you made it a federal issue. My parents sat frozen in their chairs looking like statues of shock. My mother finally found her voice a thin, wavering sound. "Officer, please. We are good people. We are churchgoers. We did not know." Miller looked at them, his expression hardening. "Desmond and Viola Jenkins, I have warrants for you as well. Aiding and abetting. Fraudulent use of a credit device." Two uniformed officers stepped forward. My father stood up slowly, his knees shaking. My mother started to cry, a loud wailing sound that was more about embarrassment than remorse. "This is a mistake," she sobbed, as the officer pulled her hands behind her back. "Nia, tell them. Tell them we are family. Tell them to stop." I stood up and walked over to where Miller was holding Brad. I looked my brother-in-law in the eye. He looked small now. The arrogance was gone, replaced by pure terror. "You were right about one thing, Brad," I said softly. "You said this family needed to make a statement. I think you just did." Miller nodded to his team. "Take them out." I watched as they were marched out of the restaurant. The same people who had walked in like royalty were now being paraded past the other diners in handcuffs. The valet was waiting outside, not to open the door for them, but to hand the keys to the tow truck driver. I picked up the declined credit card from the table and dropped it into the empty wine glass. It made a satisfying clink. I turned to the waiter, who was watching in awe. "I will take the check for my water," I said. "You can send the bill for the rest to the county jail." The walk from the private dining room to the curb was the longest journey of my family's life. The restaurant, usually a sanctuary of hushed deals and polite society, had turned into a coliseum. Every head turned. Every conversation stopped. I walked behind the procession of blue uniforms, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the marble floor. My parents kept their heads down, shrinking into their coats, but Brad was still trying to negotiate. He was twisting his neck to look at Detective Miller, babbling about wire transfers and misunderstandings. When we pushed through the revolving doors into the crisp night air, the flashing red and blue lights of the patrol cars painted the sidewalk in a chaotic strobe. But it was the yellow-amber light of the flatbed tow truck that made Brad stop dead in his tracks. The driver was already hooking chains to the front axle of the obsidian-black G Wagon. The metal screech of the winch tightening sounded like a scream. "What is he doing?" Brad yelled, the panic finally cracking his voice into a high, desperate pitch. "That is a $150,000 vehicle. You cannot tow it like it is an illegally parked sedan. He is going to scratch the rim. Stop him." Detective Miller tightened his grip on Brad's arm, jerking him forward. "The vehicle is proceeds of a crime, Mr. Miller. It is material evidence. It is going to the impound lot until the trial is over. And considering you paid for it with stolen funds, it will likely be auctioned off to pay restitution to the victim." "Restitution!" Brad spat, trying to dig his heels into the pavement. He lunged, a futile, stupid movement, trying to throw his weight against the officer to get toward the car. "Do not you touch it. That is my property. You have no right to seize my assets without a hearing." It was the last refuge of the desperate and the deluded. Miller did not even blink. He swept Brad's legs out from under him with a practiced motion, pinning him against the side of the patrol car. The sound of Brad's face hitting the cold metal hood was a dull thud that made my mother scream. "Stop resisting!" Miller barked, cinching the handcuffs tighter until Brad yelped. "You are adding resisting arrest to your list of problems. Do you want to spend the night in the hospital or the holding cell? Because I can arrange both." Brad slumped against the car, defeated. He watched with wet red eyes as the G Wagon was lifted into the air. The car he had toasted to just 20 minutes ago, the symbol of his fake empire, was now dangling helplessly on a hook. It looked ridiculous. It looked like what it was, a stolen toy being taken away from a bad child. Latoya was sobbing now, a jagged, ugly sound. "How am I supposed to get home?" she wailed, looking at the empty spot where her chariot used to be. I am wearing heels. You cannot leave me on the sidewalk. I stepped forward, wrapping my coat tighter against the wind. I hear the police van has plenty of legroom, Latoya, I said, and do not worry about the ride. It goes straight to the station. I watched the tow truck pull away, dragging their dreams of status down the street. The G Wagon disappeared around the corner, leaving nothing but an oil stain on the valet mat. It was over. The assets were frozen. The car was gone. And for the first time in years, the silence that followed was not filled with their lies. It was filled with the beautiful, heavy sound of justice. The blue and red strobe lights reflected off the polished loafers of Mr. Sterling and his associates. They were stranded on the curb, waiting for their town car, forced to watch the disintegration of the man who had promised them a 20% return. Brad was pressed against the patrol car, his face twisted in a rictus of hate. My parents were weeping softly near the restaurant entrance. It was a tableau of total ruin. But there was one figure who had not yet spoken. Marcus Washington stepped out from the shadows of the awning. He held a thick file in his hand, and he walked with the slow, deliberate pace of an executioner. He stopped directly in front of the Sterling partners. Brad saw him and struggled against the cuffs. "Don't listen to him!" Brad screamed, spitting flecks of saliva onto the pavement. "He is just a shyster lawyer. He is trying to sabotage me." Washington did not even look at Brad. He adjusted his glasses and opened the file, turning his attention to Mr. Sterling. "I believe you were about to entrust this man with significant capital. Before you leave, you should know exactly what kind of portfolio manager you were dealing with." He lifted a document from the file, the paper rattling slightly in the cold wind. He began to read, his deep voice carrying over the sound of the police radios. "The charges filed this evening are not merely administrative. Mr. Brad Miller and his accomplices are charged with theft of trust assets in excess of $100,000. This is a Class 1 felony under Illinois state law. They conspired to liquidate property belonging to the Rose Essence Living Trust, specifically a vintage Steinway piano, to fund a lifestyle they could not afford." Sterling looked at Brad, his expression shifting from annoyance to disgust. "Theft. You stole a piano. It gets worse." Washington continued, flipping the page. "We have also filed charges for credit card fraud and identity theft. The vehicle you saw being towed was insured using a credit card stolen from Ms. Nia Jenkins. The initial deposit was funded by wire fraud. This was not an investment strategy, gentlemen. It was a Ponzi scheme built on the assets of a dying grandmother." My father looked up from his hands, his face gray. "We did not know it was a crime," he whimpered. "We thought we had permission." Washington turned to him, his eyes cold behind the lenses. "You sold an asset that did not belong to you to a fence in Indiana. You signed a bill of sale as the owner when the title clearly belonged to the trust. That is not a misunderstanding, Desmond. That is intent." He turned back to the investors. "The Rose family has been a pillar of the Southside business community for 40 years. We do not tolerate parasites. Consider this your due diligence report." Mr. Sterling nodded slowly. He looked at Brad, who was now sagging against the police car, defeated. "You said you were liquid, Brad. You said you had family values. It turns out the only thing you have is a criminal record." The town car finally pulled up. Sterling opened the door, ushering his partners inside. He paused for a moment, looking at me, standing next to Washington. "You have a good lawyer, Ms. Jenkins. And you have my sympathies." He got in, and the car drove away, leaving my family alone with the consequences of their greed. Washington closed the file with a sharp snap. The sound was final. He walked over to me and handed me the folder. "The district attorney is expecting this in the morning," Washington said. "They will be booked tonight. No bail until the arraignment on Monday." I looked at the folder. It contained the autopsy of my family relationships. It was heavy, but for the first time in my life, I did not feel the weight. I felt light. "Take them away." Detective Washington nodded to Miller. As the officers guided my weeping mother and silent father into the back of the van, I did not look away. I watched until the doors slammed shut, sealing them inside the cage they had built for themselves. The street was quiet now. The show was over. The audience had left, and the critics had delivered their verdict. The metal doors of the police transport van were inches from clicking shut when I stepped forward. Wait. I raised a hand to Detective Miller. He paused, his hand resting on the latch, and looked at me with a questioning brow. There is one more witness they need to hear from, I said. I did not wait for his permission. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out my iPad. The screen illuminated the dark sidewalk with a ghostly blue light cutting through the shadows of the street. I tapped the FaceTime icon. The connection chimed once, twice. It was a cheerful sound that felt jarringly out of place against the backdrop of weeping and police radios. Then the pixelated image sharpened into high-definition focus. Nana Rose filled the screen. She was not lying down. She was sitting bolt upright, framed by the sterile white of the hospital pillows, but her presence was anything but frail. She had combed her hair. She had put on her glasses. She looked like a magistrate presiding over a tribunal from a remote bench. I held the tablet up to the barred window of the van so the 3 prisoners inside could see the face of the woman they had betrayed. "Mama!" my mother gasped, her voice cracking with a mix of hope and terror. "Do not call me that." Nana's voice boomed from the iPad speakers, distorted slightly by the connection, but undeniable in its power. "You lost the right to that name when you stripped my house like common thieves." The silence in the van was absolute. Even Brad stopped his whimpering. "I watched you," Viola Nana continued, her eyes staring directly into the camera lens. "I saw the security footage. I watched you let strangers carry out your father's history. I watched you smile while you sold my memories to buy a status symbol. You thought I was dying. You thought you could divide the spoils before the body was cold. You were wrong. I am very much alive, and I have never been more ashamed." She shifted her gaze, her voice dropping to a register of cold disappointment. "And you, Desmond, you were supposed to protect this family. You were supposed to be the man of the house. Instead, you sold your integrity for a bottle of wine and a pat on the back from a con artist. You let greed blind you to honor." "Nana, please," my father sobbed, his face hidden in his hands. And Latoya Nana said, delivering the final blow, "You are not a victim. You are a parasite. You have fed on this family's hard work for 30 years without contributing a single drop of sweat. You wanted to be rich. You wanted to be envied. Well, now you have a criminal record. That is a stain no amount of money can wash off." I held the iPad steady, my arms aching, but I refused to lower it. They needed to hear the verdict. Listen to me closely, because I am only going to say this once. The trust is closed. The will has been rewritten as of this morning. You are getting nothing. No house, no insurance money, no legacy. You traded your inheritance for a car you drove for 24 hours. I hope the leather seats were worth it. From this moment on, you are on your own. Do not call me. Do not write to me. You are strangers to me." Nana looked at me through the screen. Her expression softened just for a fraction of a second. "Finish it, Nea. I am tired." I tapped the red button. The screen went black. The link was severed. The judgment had been delivered. I nodded to Detective Miller. He slammed the van doors shut with a final metallic clang that sounded like a coffin closing. I watched the taillights of the van fade into the Chicago traffic, carrying away the people who raised me. I stood alone on the sidewalk, clutching the iPad to my chest. I was an orphan now by choice and by necessity. But as I looked up at the night sky, I realized I was finally free. The street was quiet now. The spectacle was over. 5 minutes ago, this section of the sidewalk had been a theater of chaos, filled with the strobe lights of police cruisers and the jagged sobbing of my mother. Now there was just the biting wind blowing a discarded napkin along the gutter, and the faint lingering smell of exhaust fumes from the transport van that had carried my family away. Marcus Washington stood beside me, buttoning his wool coat against the chill. He watched the red taillights disappear around the corner, his face impassive. He had seen many families destroy themselves over money, but perhaps none with quite this much theatrical flair. "They are gone," he said simply. I nodded, but my mind was replaying the tape of the last hour. I wasn't thinking about the police. I was thinking about the look on Mr. Sterling's face right before he got into his town car. That look of absolute withering contempt. It was worse than anger. Anger implies you care enough to be upset. Contempt means you are beneath consideration. When Sterling turned his back on Brad, he didn't just end a business deal. He erased Brad's existence from the financial world. Brad had spent his entire life trying to force his way into that room, and when he finally did, he was thrown out like garbage. That rejection hurt Brad more than the handcuffs ever could. And my parents. I looked at the spot on the concrete where my mother had crumpled. She hadn't fainted. She had just given up. Her legs had stopped working because the delusion that held her upright had finally snapped. For years, she had walked on a cloud of entitlement, believing she was special, believing the rules of gravity and law didn't apply to the Jenkins family. When the cold steel of the cuffs touched her skin, reality finally took hold. She was just an elderly woman in a stolen dress crying for a daughter she had manipulated for decades. I took a deep breath, expecting to feel a pang of guilt. That is what the movies tell you to feel. They expect the victorious hero to look back with a tear in her eye, mourning the tragedy of it all. But I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel guilty. I felt light. I felt the way you feel after a fever breaks and your skin cools down. The infection was gone. The parasites had been removed. The valet captain approached us looking hesitant. He held a slip of yellow paper in his hand, keeping a respectful distance. "Excuse me, miss. The towing company left this receipt for the vehicle, in case you need to claim it." I took the paper. It was the only tombstone the G Wagon would ever get. I folded it neatly and put it in my purse, placing it right next to the declined credit cards I had collected from the table. "I won't be claiming it," I told the valet. "But you can keep the receipt, frame it. It is a reminder that you cannot drive a lie forever." Washington checked his watch. "The district attorney will want a formal statement in the morning. We have a lot of paperwork to do to secure the return of the piano." I looked at him and smiled. It was a real smile, one that reached my eyes. "I don't mind the paperwork, Marcus. It is the first time in my life I am signing my name to something that actually belongs to me." I turned my back on the Onyx room. I turned my back on the empty parking spot where the symbol of their greed had stood. I walked toward my own car, a sensible sedan paid for, with honest work and clear conscience. My heels clicked on the pavement, a steady, rhythmic sound in the silent night. It was the sound of a woman walking into her future, unaccompanied, unburdened, and completely undefeated. The night was freezing, but for the first time in years, the cold didn't bother me. It felt like fresh air. The fallout was not immediate, but it was absolute. It arrived in waves of paperwork and court orders that eroded my family's existence one signature at a time. The first casualty was the house. 6 months after the dinner at the Onyx Room, I sat in Marcus Washington's office across from my parents. They looked 10 years older. My father's bluster was gone, replaced by a trembling hands. My mother wore a department store dress, not a boutique one. "The plea deal is finalized," Washington said, sliding a heavy document across the mahogany desk. "The district attorney has agreed to suspend the prison sentences for Desmond and Viola Jenkins on one condition: full restitution. You must repay the $150,000 to the Rose Essence Living Trust, plus legal fees and the cost of retrieving the instrument." My father picked up the pen. His hand shook so badly the ink stained his thumb. "We have to sell the house," he whispered. "It is the only asset we have left with any equity. It was the house where I learned to walk. It was the house where they had stored their pride for 40 years. And now it was just a liquidation asset." They signed the papers. They were not just selling a building. They were selling their history to buy their freedom. They moved into a one-bedroom rental on the edge of the city, a place with thin walls and no dining room for dinner parties. The grand entertaining was over. They were safe from prison, but they were prisoners of their own reduced circumstances. Brad was not so fortunate, not so. Once Detective Miller opened the books on the G Wagon purchase, the threads started to unravel, and the whole sweater fell apart. It turned out the theft from Nana was just the tip of the iceberg. The forensic audit revealed a Ponzi scheme dating back 3 years. He had been paying old investors with new money skimming off the top to fund his suits and his ego. The SEC got involved. The FBI got involved. There was no plea deal for Brad. The judge called him a predator. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. I went to the sentencing hearing not to gloat but to witness. When the gavel fell, Brad didn't look at the judge. He looked at the gallery, searching for an admirer, for anyone to validate him. He found no one. And then there was LaToya. The divorce came before the trial even started. She claimed she was a victim, that she had been duped by her husband. But the judge saw the credit card statements. He saw the jewelry, the vacations, the complicity. She avoided jail time by testifying against Brad, but she lost everything else. I visited her once at her new apartment. It was a second-floor walk-up with peeling paint and a view of a dumpster. The G Wagon was a distant memory replaced by a bus pass. She was sitting at a folding table filling out job applications for receptionist positions. She looked up at me, her eyes tired and devoid of the spark of entitlement that had defined her for so long. "It is hard," she said, gesturing to the cramped room where her children were sleeping on a mattress on the floor. "It is honest," I replied. "I didn't offer her money. I didn't offer to rescue her." Nana had been clear. The cycle of enabling had to end. LaToya was finally learning the lesson she should have learned at 18. You eat what you kill. You live in the house you build. I walked out of her building and got into my car. I drove past the old house, now sold to a young couple who would fill it with new, honest memories. I drove to the warehouse where the Steinway was being stored safe and sound. The wreckage was behind me. The slate was clean. My family had lost their illusions, but for the first time they were living in the real world. And so was I. Nana Rose did not die in the sterile white room of the hospice center. She made sure of that. Once the legal storm had passed and the ink was dry on the new will, she demanded to be taken home. I had the movers bring the Steinway back into the living room the day before she passed. She lay in a hospital bed set up in the center of the parlor, surrounded by the smell of old wood and beeswax, listening to me play Scott Joplin. She didn't say goodbye. She just closed her eyes during the bridge of the entertainer and never opened them again. It was a peaceful exit for a woman who had spent the last month of her life fighting a war. The funeral was a testament to who she really was. The church was packed with tenants she had helped, business partners she had mentored, and community leaders who respected her iron will. My parents and LaToya stood in the back pew, isolated like lepers. They wore ill-fitting black clothes, their heads bowed not in prayer but in shame. No one spoke to them. The community knew what they had done. They were ghosts haunting a ceremony for the living. 2 days later, we gathered in Marcus Washington's office for the final act, the reading of the will. The air in the room was thick with tension. My father sat on the edge of his seat, wringing his hands. Even after everything, after the arrest, the public humiliation, and the loss of their home, there was still a flicker of delusional hope in his eyes. He thought that perhaps in death, Nana had found mercy. He thought that blood would override betrayal. Washington sat behind his massive desk, the final will and testament of Rose Essence Jenkins resting before him. He did not look at my family. He began to read, his voice steady and devoid of emotion. "I, Rose Essence Jenkins, being of sound mind and disposing memory, do hereby bequeath the entirety of my estate, including the Jenkins real estate portfolio, the liquid assets in the Rose Essence Trust, and all personal property to my granddaughter, Nia Jenkins." My mother let out a strangled gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. My father slumped back in his chair as if he had been shot. LaToya just stared at the floor, picking at a loose thread on her coat. Washington raised a hand, silencing them. "There is a specific codicil," he said. "A final clause regarding Viola Desmond and LaToya." My parents sat up. The hope flared again. A small inheritance. A trust fund. Anything. Washington reached into his drawer and pulled out an envelope. He slid 3 objects across the polished mahogany surface. They were 3 crisp single $1 bills. "To my daughter Viola, my son-in-law, Desmond, and my granddaughter, Latoya. I leave the sum of $1 each, Washington read. He looked up, meeting their horrified gazes. Nana Rose included a personal note to explain this bequest. He adjusted his glasses and read the final words of the matriarch. This amount is not an oversight. It is a calculation. It represents the exact value you placed on my dignity while I was alive. You sold my history for cash. You treated my legacy as cheap. So I am leaving you with the change. Take this dollar and invest it with the same wisdom you showed with the rest of your lives. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. My father stared at the dollar bill in front of him. It was a final crushing insult. It was not just a disinheritance. It was a receipt for their greed. I stood up and gathered my papers. I did not touch the money. I did not look at my family. I walked out of the office, leaving them to divide their $3 however they saw fit. Nana had the last word, and it was priceless. The delivery truck that pulled into my driveway was not an unmarked van driven by thieves in the night. It was a specialized climate-controlled transport vehicle branded with the gold lettering of a reputable restoration company. I stood on the porch of my new home, a brownstone in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood that Nana had secretly purchased years ago as part of the trust portfolio. I held a mug of tea, watching the movers work. They moved with the precision of surgeons communicating in low, respectful tones as they lowered the hydraulic lift. When the Steinway emerged from the back of the truck wrapped in thick protective quilts, I felt a lump form in my throat. It looked like a wounded soldier returning from war. I walked down the steps to meet them. The lead mover, a burly man with gentle hands, nodded to me. We treated her like royalty, Ms. Jenkins. We secured the action and locked the keys. She is ready to go home. They rolled the instrument into the front parlor, a room I had designed specifically for this moment. The walls were painted a soft, warm cream to reflect the sound, and the bay windows let in streams of afternoon light. I directed them to place it in the center of the room on a Persian rug that had also been salvaged from Nana's estate. When they removed the blankets, the scent hit me instantly. It was the smell of my childhood, old spruce varnish and the faint, lingering aroma of Nana's lavender hand cream that had seeped into the wood over 50 years. I ran my hand along the curve of the lid. The black lacquer still gleamed like obsidian, but near the back leg, there was a deep, jagged scratch. It was a scar from the day my father and the fence had shoved it into the cargo van. The restorer had offered to buff it out to make it look brand new. I had refused. That scar was part of its history now. It was the mark of its survival. It was a reminder that while greed can damage a legacy, it cannot destroy it. I sat down on the leather bench. It creaked slightly, a familiar sound that bridged the gap between the past and the present. I opened the fallboard, revealing the row of ivory and ebony keys. They grinned back at me, waiting. I placed my fingers on the keys, my hands trembling just slightly. For months, the only sounds in my life had been shouting sirens and legal arguments. I had forgotten what harmony sounded like. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I didn't play a complex sonata or a showy concerto. I played the first song Nana ever taught me. It was a simple gospel arrangement of His Eye is on the Sparrow. My left hand found the rhythm steady and grounding, while my right hand carried the melody. The first note rang out clear and bell-like, filling the empty house. It resonated in my chest, vibrating against my ribs. The second note followed, then the third. The music swirled around me, chasing away the ghosts of the Onyx Room, the police station, and the betrayal. With every measure, I felt the heavy mantle of the last year slipping off my shoulders. I was not just playing a piano. I was having a conversation with Nana. I could hear her voice in the lower register telling me to keep my tempo steady. I could feel her strength in the chords. The house was no longer just a building. It was a home. The silence was gone, replaced by the sound of victory. I played until the sun went down, letting the music wash the slate clean. The piano was back. The debt was paid, and the legacy was safe in my hands. The last vibration of the chord fades into the sunlit room, settling into the corners like a comfortable guest. It is a good silence. It is not the empty, anxious silence of a house waiting for the next crisis. It is the solid, peaceful silence of a fortress that is finally secure. I take my hands off the ivory keys, feeling the cool smoothness under my fingertips one last time, and turn on the bench to face you. I know what some of you are thinking. I can hear the whispers. You are thinking that I was cold. You are thinking that sending my own parents to a police precinct and letting my sister lose everything was extreme. You are wondering how a daughter could stand on a chilly sidewalk and watch her family get driven away in a transport van without shedding a single tear. I used to think that way too. I used to think that family was a life sentence without parole. I thought that simply because we shared DNA, I was obligated to share my wallet, my sanity, and my self-respect. I thought that setting boundaries was an act of betrayal. I thought that being the bigger person meant letting them make me feel small. But I learned the hard way that peace is expensive. And sometimes the cost of that peace is the people you love. Nana Rose did not leave me a fortune just so I could be wealthy. She left me a weapon. She left me the means to cut the cord. She taught me that being a good girl is dangerous if it means you let people walk all over you with dirty shoes. She taught me that you teach people how to treat you. If you tolerate disrespect, you will get disrespect. If you bail them out, they will keep digging holes, and eventually they will pull you in with them. My parents and Latoya did not steal a piano because they were hungry. They did not steal it to save a life. They stole it because they thought I was weak. They thought I was a permanent fixture in the background, a resource to be mined until it was empty. They mistook my silence for permission. Do not make that mistake. Do not let your empathy become your weakness. We are taught that forgiveness is divine. But forgiveness without change is just self-destruction. I forgave them 1,000 times. I forgave the small loans that were never paid back. I forgave the backhanded compliments. I forgave the way they looked at me like a utility bill rather than a human being. But there comes a point where forgiveness is just permission. This wasn't about a piano. The piano was just wood and wire. This was about dignity. It was about standing up and saying, "No more. You cannot strip mine my existence to fuel your delusions." If there is one thing I want you to take away from my story, it is this. You are the trustee of your own life. You are the guardian of your own legacy. Do not let anyone, not even your mother or your brother-in-law, treat you like a line item in their budget. You are the asset. Protect yourself. Document everything. Trust your instincts when they tell you something is wrong. And when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. To anyone watching who is stuck in that cycle of guilt and obligation, who is afraid to speak up because they do not want to rock the boat, I am telling you now. Capsizing the boat is the best thing you can do if the boat is sinking anyway. Swim to shore, dry yourself off, and do not look back. It took me 30 years to find my voice. It took a felony to make me use it. But now that I am singing my own song, I am never going back to the background vocals. I am curious about you. Have you ever felt like the ATM for your family? Have you ever had to choose between your mental health and your bloodline? What is the G Wagon in your life that you need to let the tow truck take away? Tell me your story in the comments. Let us start a conversation about breaking cycles, because the only way to win the game is to stop playing by their rules. I am Nia Jenkins, and this is my house. This is my piano, and this is my life. The most profound lesson from Nia's journey is that shared DNA is not a license for exploitation. For years, Nia confused enabling with love, allowing her family's greed to drain her spirit and resources. True empowerment began only when she replaced blind loyalty with strict boundaries. We must learn that no is a complete sentence, and that protecting your peace sometimes requires cutting ties with toxic relatives. You are the sole trustee of your life. Do not let familial guilt manipulate you into emotional or financial bankruptcy. Justice isn't cruelty. It is simply holding people accountable for their actions. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with a family member to save your own future? Share your story in the comments below.